Hey guys, I'm joined by John Carmack, who is, what is your actual title now?
I'm technical director.
Technical director?
Yeah.
What you've got Rage here at the show, we were talking before the camera started rolling about how you wanted to make a big push for 60 frames a second and how that sort of helps the game stand out. Like, what was the reason behind that you thought it was so important to stick to that and not just at some point say, guys, it'd be easier just to drop down to 30 frames a second?
Well, it's always a set of trade-offs, and when we rolled off of Doom 3 and I started doing the next generation graphics research, I started off in a direction that was going to be a 30 frame per second renderer that was going to allow all this incredible flexibility. We would have sort of RenderMan-like ability to do all sorts of crazy things on there. But when I made the decision to migrate towards this uniquely textured world approach with the mega textures, it really gave us two key things. It gave us this ability to paint the world in a way nobody had ever seen before on a level of visual quality, but it also, somewhat counterintuitively, gave us a really high-speed rendering path. We trade a lot of flexibility. You can't just go in and crank every dial around on the materials and the mega textures, but it's actually a really high-speed rendering path. And that opened up the ability to do the full HDTV resolution at 60 frames per second. But it's by no means an easy feat to do that, and it's a continuous battle to marshal these precious little milliseconds around. It's like, well, do we want to add some more particles or add something to the post and still hold it at 60 frames per second? And that was one of the core arguments through the entire development of Rage, where most of our competitors are 30 frames per second games on there, and life is easier when you've got that extra cushion. It doesn't sound as much as you might think, going from 16 to 33 milliseconds on there. But if you're already doing a couple milliseconds in post and a couple milliseconds in a pre-pass, on the other hand, it looks like you've got 3 times as much time to do fancy graphics stuff. And I'm a graphics guy. I think about all these things I can do with graphics. But when I sat down and said, well, this is what I can do at 60 frames per second, and if I go nuts, this is what I can do at 30, there's all these connoisseur-like things where it can be like, oh, look at the Fresnel fall off on this shaped specular highlight of this glint that's happening in the secondary reflection here. But when I think about, okay, somebody plops down in their living room, picks up the controller and blasts away, a lot of those details some of them will be subliminally valuable on there, but I do think that the games look gorgeous at the level that we can do today, and that it is time to start spending some of this power on other things beyond making prettier pixels there. And we all know that when you run the game at extremely high frame rates, it has that silky smooth feel to it, and the responsiveness of knowing that when you tap that button, that gunshot's coming out right now, not coming out some little bit after. Dialing in, zooming in on your target on there is a lot easier with the tighter feedback loops, and it has all of these benefits, but damn, it's just harder making a game do that if you're trying to be really aggressive. I mean, we've had Quake Live has run at 120 frames per second for years because it's not aggressive on the visuals. But when you're taking a dual goal of making something look better than anybody's ever seen before, it's been a hard fight. And there were years during the development process when sometimes it felt like half the team at least was lined up saying, we just want our lives to be easier, we want to throw more enemies at the character. And there's honest trade-offs where you can't throw 30 guys at the player like with this technology at 60 frames per second, so the designers get constrained in various ways. But we did finally turn a corner in the last year, really, when it's running at 60 frames per second on the consoles and people are playtesting finished levels when they realize this was worth it. This was worth it to make it feel like this, because damn, this just feels better than the other games that we're competing against on there.
So this E3, we have a lot of new hardware, and as a guy with a technical background and a guy who likes to speak his mind about, and is actually able to influence those hardware when you kind of get a chance to see them early. What's your take on where Nintendo's going through 3DS, Sony's Vita, and their new hardware, the Wii U?
So for the Wii U, the interesting thing there is that it does bring it up to a technological level where we could deploy InTech 5 on it. When we designed the technology, we surveyed all the consoles that were soon to be out and realized that it's an obvious sweet spot where you can do 360, PS3, and PC without making any really significant compromises. But if you want to target Wii, you really need a different approach. And we actually toyed with the idea of using the direction that I took for the iOS Rage running on there would have been a perfect fit for the Wii. And we talked about making a game like that for the Wii, but as a publisher, we looked at it and thought, well, it's probably not the best time to be starting a Wii project development. The sales are in decline and all this. And the other big worry was that the Wii was always looked at as, for a gamer that would buy Rage, that it's a second or third console, that there's not that many people that would want our style of games that only have a Wii. It'll be interesting to see what the uptake is with the Wii U, where it's powerful enough to do this, but does it wind up bringing in a class of gamers that doesn't already have the other devices on there? I do think that the private touchscreen is probably a more universally applicable new bit of technology than most of the motion tracking stuff that Microsoft and Sony are working with, where motion interaction is wonderfully cool stuff in its way, and I dearly wish I had the time to do like an Xbox Live title or something like that just to play with it, because it's cool, awesome technology, but Rage doesn't support these out of the box because it's not completely obvious how you wind up improving on the dual thumbstick control that we're built around by letting people go and wave their arms around some way. While a touchscreen, we could imagine, like on Rage, there's obvious things how we could go ahead and do some of the extra stuff down there, throw additional information there, and I think it adds a lot of ability for multiplayer, for increasing the multiplayer on a single screen experience. And I think that while when the DS first came out, a lot of people wondered if that was just going to be some quirky, weird gimmick, but that gets such broad use in almost every game, and it really has been a positive thing. So I think that's a good direction. Now on the Vita, Sony came out and gave us and disclosed us a while ago on there, and I think that they learned a lot of good lessons from the PS3 deployment. They're taking every step they can to try and make development much faster and easier, to make the kind of content creation path on there really nice, and I think they've done smart things there. But it's a gutsy move launching a high-end portable gaming system in this post-smartphone world here. I wouldn't want to be the one making those decisions, because it's, I can see plenty of options for it to fail on there, where people say their smartphones are good enough, plus they can make phone calls. But on the other hand, the ace that they may have there is you program that the way you do a high-end console, and it should be fairly straightforward for a lot of developers to literally take their PS3 or 360 titles and move them over there. It's not as powerful, you need to make some cuts, but it is also lower resolution, and it will not be a painful process to be able to pull that full-scale game over there, and to have the dual thumbsticks and the extra buttons. You should be able to play a console-quality game on there. But there are going to be large market dynamics things that I don't claim to be an oracle for on that, to see how that actually plays out.
So 360, PS3, when they came out, is bleeding edge technology. I mean, Sony was taking a loss on that forever, because that was sort of Sony's thing, was that we're going to have the latest technology, the latest graphics. Nintendo took a backseat approach to that, allowed them to be profitable day one. When we get to this new round of hardware, where Nintendo proved you could do more things with old technology, do you expect that companies like Sony and Microsoft are going to go to the bleeding edge and take losses on hardware? Like, do you think that we've kind of reached the point where that is just not viable anymore?
So there's a few aspects to that. This generation of consoles has been really great for developers, where here we are 5-6 years in, and nobody's tapped out this generation. We haven't, our competitors haven't. There are still plenty of innovative things that can be done on this generation, and we'll see games continue to get better in coming years. So when we start looking at the next generation of consoles there's going to be competing factors there. On the one hand, games look so damn good right now, you have to throw a lot of extra processing power at it to make a difference that's really going to register, to make people want to go out and spend another $300 on a new console on there. Just throwing 10 times the graphics power and turning 30 hertz games into 60, giving anti-aliasing and running at 1080p instead of 720p and deeper frame buffers. And these are the obvious things that'll happen if you give graphics programmers 8 or 10 times more power. They'll suck it all up. Each of these things will be good, but it's not completely clear to me that that's going to be immediately compelling enough to make people go out and buy the next console there. Now, we have graphics research directions to make completely different engines that render in different ways, that may provide radically different directions, but nobody has one of these on the shelf. Nobody knows how they're going to turn out. If a console maker goes out and doesn't provide this order of magnitude more performance, I think it stands a risk of not being perceived as adding enough value to get people to step past their existing consoles. So I would be surprised if Microsoft and Sony don't take a really pretty aggressive push on there. I think they may wind up cost reducing and having some maybe optical disc free SKUs on there that are broadband download only. I think that's an obvious place where they can wind up cost reducing some of these things. But yeah, I'd be surprised if they don't swing for the fences on the hardware again. I think there's still the risk of being left behind, and I don't think they're completely sure that Nintendo's going to have a win with this generation by just playing barely catch up and creating a brand new platform.
Great. Well, John, thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on being on the home stretch of Rage.
All right, thank you.